in this political crisis in Venezuela. Britain, France and Spain are among some of the European countries who've come out in support of Juan Guaido as the interim president. The United States has been mounting diplomatic and economic pressure in favor of the opposition leader from the beginning of the crisis. Canada, which has just announced $53 million of aid to Venezuela, and a host of Latin American countries are also backing Guaido. Meanwhile, Mexico and Uruguay still recognize Maduro's leadership for now and have offered to mediate. Maduro's ideological allies, Bolivia, Cuba and Nicaragua, say they remain committed to him. Russia, an old ally of the country, which has poured billions of dollars of investments and loans, has rejected what it calls European interference in Venezuela. China and Turkey are also supporting Nicolas Maduro. Well, let's now bring in Colin Harding to the news grid. He's a former Latin America editor at the Independent newspaper. He's via Skype from Manchester in the UK. Thank you so much for being with us, Colin. What, first of all, do these European countries gain from recognizing Juan Guaido? What interests are at stake here?
Well, they're hoping to push the process along. It's also interesting to note that the individual European countries have recognized Juan Guaido. The European Union as a body hasn't. The High Representative for Foreign Affairs, Federica Mogherini, says that they don't have the power to do that. But what the European Union is doing is setting up what they call an international contact group, which is going to be based in Caracas and which has invited Latin American countries to join as well. And they're hoping that they can push along the process of creating the conditions for free and fair elections, as they call them. But calling these elections are really the job of an interim president. And at the moment, Juan Guaido has declared himself to be the interim president, but he doesn't actually control anything. So everything is still very much up in the air.
Yeah, and the military especially is still backing Maduro. What about Russia's interests in backing Venezuela's president, Colin? And does that put Europe in the crosshairs of the proxy confrontation between Russia and the US, especially at a time when Europe is looking very vulnerable?
Yeah, well, yes, indeed. I mean, of course, the Russians do have powerful economic interests, particularly the Rosneft, the oil company, has big investments and big interests in Venezuela, and they'll want their money back. And China, equally, has also got economic interests in Venezuela. But in both cases, they're also trying to project their international power and influence, and particularly to be able to tweak the tail of the United States by encroaching on what is traditionally the American sphere of interest. It is interesting that Juan Guaido has appealed to both Russia and China to change sides, to back him by saying that really your own interests are better served by supporting a legitimate president with a stable government which is recognized internationally, rather than staying with a president who's really presiding over a disaster.
Colin, a question here from one of our viewers on Facebook, John, who asks, how will this situation come to an end? What are your views? Maduro has warned the Trump administration against repeating a Vietnam in Venezuela. What happens next, in your view, if Maduro is not going to call elections and refuses to step down? What will break the impasse?
Well, we'll have to see. Things could go horribly wrong still. I mean, as we've heard, international aid is now piling up on the border in Colombia, in Brazil, and in some of the former Dutch islands in the Caribbean. They haven't tried to get those over the border yet, but that will be the next step to try and do that. Now, Guaido is hoping that the worsening situation will eventually persuade the military to change sides. But it is a big gamble because there's no guarantee that will happen. But that they'd have to change sides in order for the humanitarian aid to get into the country. It can't be done otherwise. And if the military were to allow the aid in and escort it, that would be defying the orders of the president, Maduro, who they recognized up to now. So I think this thing could come to a head quite quickly. And really the Guaido strategy, which has been backed by the United States and other Western countries, is to try and really force the hands of the military to make a choice, and hoping that it will go their way.
Thank you so much for your insight, Colin Harding, joining us there from Manchester in the UK.